Right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. You know, that classic by J.D. Salinger, all about Holden Caulfield, this teenager,
Yeah.
and his experiences over a few days
Okay.
leading up to Christmas in the 1950s.
Right.
But it's not really your typical holiday story.
No.
Holden's dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, grief, alienation, feeling like the whole world is just full of phonies.
Yeah, definitely. And it's
That's right.
fascinating how Salinger really captures that like teenage feeling of disillusionment, you know?
Absolutely.
Holden's our narrator and he doesn't hold back.
No.
You're right in his head,
Yeah.
hearing every cynical thought.
And that's what we're going to do today. Just take a journey through the book, chapter by chapter, really unpack Holden's experiences.
Right?
So tell me, where does this whole thing kick off?
Well, the book opens with Holden at this like swanky boarding school, Pencey prep. It's just a few days before Christmas break.
Gotcha.
And Holden's already on thin ice.
Right.
He's failed out of 3 other schools.
Yeah.
And it's clear Pencey's not really doing it for him either.
So right from the start,
Yeah.
we see Holden has got this kind of outsider perspective. He's observing everything
Exactly.
with a critical eye,
Yeah.
already just labeling people and situations as phony.
Totally.
What really sets him off at Pencey, though? There's got to be some catalyst.
Yeah, there are a few key moments.
Yeah.
First, there's this encounter with Mr. Spencer,
Okay.
his history teacher. Spencer means well, you know?
Right.
Tries to give Holden this pep talk about failing grades, but Holden just sees it as condescending and insincere.
Holden can't stand those kind of adults.
Yeah.
Right? The ones who just about empty platitude.
Exactly. He sees right through it.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole thing with Stradlater,
Okay.
his roommate. Yeah. Stradlater's this like popular, handsome guy. And to top it all off, he goes on a date with Jane Gallagher,
Oh, yeah.
a girl that Holden used to date
Right.
and clearly still has feelings for.
Oh, man. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Right.
Holden's already on edge, and now this.
Exactly. It eats him up.
Yeah.
He obsesses over this date the whole time Stradlater's gone, worrying about what might be happening between them.
Right.
When Stradlater gets back, Holden confronts him.
Yeah.
They get into a fight.
And that's kind of the last straw?
That's the last straw for Holden at Pencey.
So chapter 3,
Yep.
he makes a run for it.
He does.
Instead of going home to face his parents, he decides to head to New York City a few days early.
Right.
He figures he can lay low in a hotel for a bit,
Right.
avoid dealing with everything.
Exactly.
So here we have Holden,
Yeah.
alone in New York City, just before Christmas. Doesn't exactly sound like a Hallmark movie, does it?
Not at all. He checks into this crummy hotel,
Right.
wanders around, tries to connect with strangers, even has this awkward encounter with a prostitute.
Oh, wow.
It's all very Holden Caulfield,
Right.
this mix of bravado and vulnerability.
And we see him constantly searching for something genuine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he keeps getting disappointed, finding phoniness everywhere he looks.
It's this cycle of hope and disillusionment.
Yeah.
He's looking for connection, but also just pushing people away.
Right.
And then lurking beneath it all is this intense grief
Yeah.
over his younger brother, Allie,
Right.
who died of leukemia a few years earlier.
Chapter 6.
Yeah.
That's where we really start to understand the depth of Holden's pain.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
He talks about Allie's baseball mitt.
Right.
With all the poems written on it.
Yeah, such a powerful image.
It is, absolutely.
Allie's death is this like defining moment for Holden, this loss of innocence
Yeah.
that he can't seem to move past.
Yeah.
It's like he's frozen in time,
Yeah.
desperate to preserve childhood, both Allie's and his own.
And that brings us to chapter 7.
Okay.
That iconic Catcher in the Rye fantasy.
Yes.
Right.
Holden imagines himself standing in a field of rye,
Right.
catching children before they fall off a cliff,
Right.
which he sees as this metaphor for losing their innocence.
It's this incredibly powerful image. Yeah.
Almost heartbreaking.
It is.
So we've got Holden in New York,
Yeah.
struggling with grief, loneliness,
Right.
desperate need for authenticity.
Yeah.
Chapter 8, he calls up Sally Hayes,
Okay.
a girl he used to date.
Uh-huh.
Tell me about that encounter. What's going on with them?
Well, Sally represents this world that Holden both wants to be a part of
Right.
and also despises.
Yeah.
He takes her to a play, ice skating.
Right.
All very phony in his eyes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's also trying to explain his feelings to her,
No.
even suggests they run away together.
Talk about a mixed message, right?
It is, yeah.
And Sally, of course, is totally thrown by it. She doesn't understand him.
Right.
And he ends up insulting her, pushing her away.
Another failed attempt.
Another one.
At connection.
Yeah.
This pattern keeps repeating itself, doesn't it?
Right.
He pushes people away, even when he desperately wants them to understand him.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in Chapter 9, he bumps into this old classmate, Carl Luce.
Oh, yeah.
What's that about?
Well, Carl Luce represents this more sophisticated intellectual side of Holden's life.
Gotcha.
Holden sees him as someone who might get him.
Right.
But Carl's grown up, moved on.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of annoyed by Holden's questions and his immaturity.
Another dead end for Holden.
Yeah.
So by Chapter 10, it's getting late.
Mm-hmm.
Holden's alone again.
Yep.
Feeling pretty lost.
Yeah.
What happens next?
He starts drinking heavily, just wandering around the city.
Oh, wow.
Getting increasingly desperate and reckless. He even tries to call Jane Gallagher.
Mm.
But her mom answers the phone.
Right.
And he hangs up.
He can't seem to escape this feeling of alienation, can he?
No.
He's surrounded by people.
Yeah.
Yet he's completely alone.
Right.
So where does this downward spiral lead him?
Well, he keeps thinking about this advice.
Okay.
His old English teacher, Mr. Antolini, gave him. Mr. Antolini was one of the few adults Holden actually respected. So late at night, in a pretty desperate state, Holden decides to call Mr. Antolini.
Okay, so that's where we'll leave it for now.
All right.
This late night visit to Mr. Antolini's apartment.
Yeah.
It's a turning point in the story.
Definitely.
So in part 2,
okay,
we'll pick up there and see how it all unfolds.
Sounds good. Welcome back. So last time we left Holden seeking refuge at Mr. Antolini's apartment.
Right.
Hoping for some guidance.
Yeah, he's really reaching out for a lifeline here, isn't he?
He is.
Like hitting rock bottom. So tell me about this visit.
Okay.
Does Mr. Antolini offer any words of wisdom?
He does. He gives Holden this really heartfelt speech about the dangers of falling.
Okay.
You know, of losing himself in despair.
Right.
Mr. Antolini can really see that Holden's on this dangerous path.
Yeah.
Tries to warn him about the consequences. He even quotes this line from a poem. The mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause, while the mark of a mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Seems like Mr. Antolini really gets what Holden's going through.
He does.
Yeah.
But then things get a little complicated.
Oh.
Holden falls asleep on the couch.
Okay.
And he wakes up later to find Mr. Antolini patting his head.
That sounds like trouble.
Holden totally misinterprets the situation.
Right.
Freaks out and just leaves.
Oh, man.
Feeling even more betrayed and misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's a really tragic moment because it just shows how deeply damaged Holden is. How unable he is to trust even someone who cares about him.
Absolutely. So Chapter 14 ends with Holden wandering the streets of New York.
Right.
More alone than ever.
Yeah.
This whole experience with Mr. Antolini just seems to push him further into despair.
It does. He starts having these disturbing thoughts.
Yeah.
Even hallucinating at one point.
Really?
Yeah. He's reaching a breaking point both physically and emotionally.
So in this really fragile state, Chapter 15, he makes a decision.
He does.
Tell me about that.
He decides to run away.
Wow.
He writes this note to Phoebe. His younger sister asks her to meet him at the museum.
Okay.
He plans to say goodbye and then just head west, you know, where he can pretend to be deaf-mute and avoid all human contact.
This fantasy of escaping to the West, becoming a recluse.
Right.
It's like Holden's ultimate rejection of the world. But
it is. It shows how deeply he's yearning for this world.
Yeah.
Without phoniness, without the pain and disappointment of just like human relationships.
But then something happens that shifts everything.
It does.
What is it? What brings Holden back from the brink?
Phoebe.
Okay.
She shows up at the museum.
Right.
But she's not just there to say goodbye. She's packed a suitcase.
Oh, wow.
She wants to go with him.
He's calling his bluff.
She is.
And forcing him to actually confront the reality of his situation.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
And it's this moment of just pure love and loyalty.
Yeah.
Phoebe sees right through Holden's cynicism and his tough facade.
Yeah.
She sees the hurt little boy underneath and wants to protect him.
So this encounter with Phoebe in Chapter 16 is a real turning point.
Yes.
It's the moment Holden starts to see things a little bit more clearly.
It is. He realizes that he can't just abandon his sister.
Yeah.
You know, he's got responsibilities he can't run away from.
Right.
He takes her to the zoo, pushes her on the carousel.
Uh-huh.
And you see this, like, glimmer of hope in him, this flicker of genuine connection.
Like, just for a brief moment, He forgets about all the phoniness, all the despair.
Yeah.
Just focuses on being present.
Exactly.
With his sister.
It's a reminder of the things that truly matter. Love, family, connection.
So chapter 17 ends on a more hopeful note.
Mhm.
But we know the story doesn't end there.
Right.
What happens next?
Well,
Where does Holden go from here?
Well, the last chapter, chapter 18, is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Holden doesn't actually tell us exactly what happens next.
Oh, okay.
He's narrating this whole story from a mental institution, looking back on these events.
Gotcha.
He mentions that he's going to a new school in the fall, but he doesn't give us any details about how he ended up in the institution or what his future holds.
This ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
It's one of the most discussed aspects of the book, right?
It is.
It leaves so much open to interpretation.
It does, and I think that's part of what makes The Catcher in the Rye so powerful.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't tie everything up neatly, leaves us with questions, forces us to grapple with the complexities of Holden's character and his journey.
It invites us to think about what might happen to him next.
Right.
Whether he'll find a way to heal, to connect with the world in a more meaningful way.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground, going through Holden's journey almost chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
But I think this ending, with its unresolved questions,
Right.
is the perfect segue into our final segment,
Okay.
where we'll delve a little bit deeper into the themes of the book and just discuss its lasting impact.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. So we've walked through Holden Caulfield's story, seen the world through his eyes, and I gotta say, it's really left me thinking.
Yeah.
What really strikes me is that even though this book was written decades ago, Holden's struggles still feel so relevant.
It's amazing.
Today, you know?
It's the mark of a truly great work of literature, right?
Absolutely.
It speaks to something just timeless about the human experience. And The Catcher in the Rye certainly does that.
It does.
You know, it taps into these universal themes of alienation, loss, that search for authenticity.
Let's dig into those themes a bit.
Okay.
One thing that keeps coming up is this idea of phoniness.
Right.
Holden just sees it everywhere.
Everywhere.
And the way people talk, dress, act.
Yeah.
It's like he's constantly on guard, just looking for signs of insincerity.
Right, and I think it really reflects the anxieties of the time period when the book was written. You know, the 1950s, post-World War II America. There was this rise of conformity, consumerism, this pressure to fit in, present this like perfect image of success and happiness.
And Holden, with his hypersensitivity, just sees right through that, rejects that artificiality, this pretense.
Yeah, and at the same time, he's also struggling with his own sense of identity.
Exactly. He's trying to figure out who he is,
Yeah.
what he believes in,
Right.
but he's surrounded by these examples of what he doesn't want to be.
Exactly.
And that leads to this feeling of alienation,
Yeah.
of not belonging anywhere.
Right. It's like he's stuck between childhood and adulthood, you know? Unable to fully embrace either one.
And that brings us back to that powerful image of the Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
Holden wanting to save children from falling off the cliff of adulthood to preserve their innocence.
It's such a poignant image.
It is.
And I think it speaks to Holden's deep-seated grief over his brother, Allie.
Right.
Allie represents this, like, lost innocence, this purity that Holden just desperately wants to hold on to.
He sees growing up as this inevitable fall from grace, a loss of something precious.
Right.
But there's also this bit of hypocrisy there, too, don't you think?
Oh, totally.
Holden criticizes others for being phony, but he's also putting on a show, trying to project this image of coolness and detachment.
That's a great point.
He's a complex character, full of contradictions.
He wants to be authentic, but he's terrified of vulnerability.
Right.
He craves connection, but pushes people away.
He's a walking paradox.
He is.
And I think that's what makes him so fascinating and relatable.
Totally. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Feeling like we don't fit in, trying to figure out who we are.
Absolutely.
Where we belong.
And that open-ended conclusion
Right.
just leaves us with so many questions.
This does.
So much to ponder.
Yeah, Salinger doesn't give us any easy answers.
No.
And I think that's part of the book's brilliance.
I agree.
It challenges us to think for ourselves, consider the possibilities,
Right.
find our own meaning in Holden's story.
Well, I think we've explored Holden Caulfield's world pretty thoroughly today.
We have.
From Pencey Prep to the streets of New York, we followed his every step.
Every step.
Felt his every emotion.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
And I hope our listeners have gained a deeper appreciation for The Catcher in the Rye. And its, enduring power.
It's a book that stays with you.
It really does.
Long after you finish reading it.
Absolutely.
It prompts you to reflect on your own experiences and to just see the world with fresh eyes.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.